beautiful for spacious skies.
Por tus olas de grano sambar.
Yo pishina tsakote.
Soy baba ng mga prutas.
America, America, God shed His grace on thee.
और वही जरे के साथ ताज तेरा अच्छा de la mer à la mer brilla.
Berate verrière tirotard.
From sea to shining.
In 1931, James Truslow Adams coined the term the American Dream, which referred to that dream of a land in which life should be better and fuller and richer for everyone. The American Dream tells a story of national identity that is all-inclusive, in which each individual has the opportunity to achieve their own vision of happiness and success. However, in society today, there are specific groups of people who are marginalized and left out of the encompassing idea of the American Dream. New narratives originate when one focuses on those stories of those who are oppressed. One narrative emerges through the issue of income inequality.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution, and 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly.
Income inequality is obvious evidence that not all people can attain the American dream. However, as an economic and political issue, less than half of the population are concerned about the growing gap. In American culture, it is uncomfortable to accuse a rich person that being rich is wrong, but it's easier to point to the poor, that if they would just work harder and do more, they would be better off. While the American dream is technically attainable for everyone, in this narrative, certain disadvantages prevent individuals from accomplishing the vision, especially those who are at an economic disadvantage. This is also seen in the issue of gender inequality.
The narrative Americans tell themselves about gender inequality is that it existed a long time ago and was resolved when women finally achieved legal voting rights in 1920. This implies that for almost 100 years, women and men are equal as voting citizens of America. However, while legally and politically women are assured equal rights, the facts show that this is often far from the case. Today, many women are still underserved, underrepresented, and generally unequal in America's economic, social, and political system. In 2012, women were still earning only 77 cents to the man's dollar, despite making up 46.9% of the labor force, and women today hold only 18.5% of congressional seats, and they are just 20% of U.S. senators. While we tell ourselves the story that the efforts of women's rights activists paid off, the reality of the situation suggests women are still largely unequal to men today, and thus not as eligible for the American dream. The LGBTQ community faces similar discrimination and exclusion in the larger American narrative.
Since 1776, America has prided itself on the idea that all men are created equal, but many groups have been left out of this ideal, including the LGBTQ community. For example, just this year, the state of Arizona recently passed a bill that granted business owners the right to deny service to homosexuals based on their quote-unquote religious beliefs. This bill is evidence that Americans are still struggling with the idea of equality. Why? Well, even though it was eventually vetoed, the fact that in this progressive era something as degrading as homosexual discrimination was passed into law is quite frankly regression. In addition, racial inequality still snakes its way through America, whether or not we'd like to formally admit it. Trayvon Martin, for example, was an unarmed 17-year-old black male who on February 26, 2012, was shot and killed by neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman, thus sparking a tremendous public debate and critique of Zimmerman's motives as well as the court's decision to indict him. Even if racism truly wasn't an element in the Trayvon Martin case, the fact that it was the main point of discussion surrounding the ordeal says a lot about where we are as a nation, and that as much as we'd like to believe it, the debate regarding racial inequality is not resolved.
Every American is told from a very young age that they can do whatever they want to do with their life and be whatever they want to be. If you work hard enough, you can achieve anything, or at least that's what we're told. The American dream has been truly attainable for many Americans in history, and many of these people have contributed greatly to the general success of our country and to the furtherance of this certain romantic ideology. However, America's ascent has also come at the expense of an unthinkable number of lives and massive oppression around the world and of American citizens themselves. It is often said that we have come a long way, that steps have been made towards rectifying the many ways people have been wronged in the course of our history. While this is certainly true to a degree, it perhaps overlooks the uglier facts of our nation's story. It may also give us an exaggerated idea of how far we've actually come. To ignore or exclude from the narrative the uncomfortable and often difficult to reconcile details of the story of us is misleading. It portrays an idealistic image of America which has simply never been and is today still not our reality. We need to come to terms with the disparity between the American dream in theory and in practice. A realistic construal of where we are now and how far we've come requires a more complete articulation of how we've gotten here, and this disparity must be eliminated if we are to understand how far we still have to go.